about a mile up. That's our first lock and dam that we need to enter. Got to get you a decent video when we get there. Well, the first lock we saw was when we first hit the Ohio. It was downstream from us, and we didn't know anything about it. But me and Dad both were a little concerned because we had never been through a lock or knew what it was. We saw some rapids, and off in the distance looked like it was a fort. Once we got on the radio, we looked it up, and I actually used my cell phone and called them, and they explained what we needed to do, and they said they couldn't see us. We didn't have anything shiny on the boat, and so they actually came out and met us in one of their boats, and the guy threw us a life jacket, and he says, "Compliments of the United States Civil Army Corps." He said, "Put this on the front of the boat so people can see you." So we had some little clips and straps, and we strapped that on the front. And then we followed him in, and he said, we're gonna set you out here about 200 yards away, and we have your phone number. We'll call you when it's your turn. I know Dad was a little nervous too, because we had never done anything like this before. Here we are entering our first lock on the Ohio River.
The water was our level when we went in, and after we got in, what surprised me is how fast they took that water out of the lock. It just seemed like we just kept falling and falling, and then we got down to the level, and then I saw the doors open up, and we was the same level as the river was when we went out. But I don't know, it must have been 20 feet drop. It seemed like we was forever falling. Well, I didn't realize it'd be so swift after the water was raised fairly, and then when we got in, it was fairly swift, and we had to grab a hold of a rail to tie up. And the first one I missed, and we got a little further down, and I was able to get a hold of one, and we tied up, and they wanted to make sure we was tied before they did anything else and let the water out. But yeah, it was kind of scary if you didn't know anything about it, which we didn't.
We were at 45 when we came in. Dropped 13 feet. Yes, that was our first experience with the lock, and we had no idea what to expect, but it worked out. We got on the other side and headed down the Ohio. As we went down the river a little ways, I was looking on my Google Maps and saw that there was a casino. We knew that they'd have steak, so I thought it'd be a nice place to have some steak. So we parked above the casino, and then I got out, and Dad didn't feel like going up the hill in the brush, and I thought, well, there's got to be a path somewhere. So I almost cut myself a path up to the casino. Finally got up there, went inside, and I played blackjack, had a steak. I think I won $45, enough to pay for dinner, and then I actually brought steak back down after it was dark then, cutting myself back through the weeds to get down to it. I think Dad caught a few fish while I was up there. Here we are outside of Metropolis, Illinois, and that is the Harris Casino, where I'm going to go in and play some live poker and hopefully pay for this trip.
What we didn't know, if we'd been acquainted with the river, we'd known that it was a better place to pull in, for Barry to go to the casino. But the next morning when we left our campsite, we didn't go hardly any distance down the river, and there was a nice place that they had fixed for boats to park to go up to the casino, and there's a nice walkway. Barry wouldn't have had to crawl through weeds up to his neck, and over logs and things to get where he's at. And another thing that he told me when he got back, he said the security got on to him because he wasn't supposed to be in that area. He's supposed to be somewhere else.
They must have caught me on camera with a machete cutting through going to the casino. They probably thought I was trying to rob them. So yeah, they actually, when I left, one of the security guards followed me to the edge to make sure that I was actually leaving and could see the boat. So yeah, they were cautious.
Well, one thing we noticed that the change of the water color when we saw where the Ohio was flowing into the Mississippi was a darker color. Well, I guess they call it the muddy Mississippi, and that's true.
I mean, it was miles once we hit it. I mean, it seemed like the Ohio was more of a green blue, and then when we hit the Mississippi, where they came into a Y into one, it actually had one side of the river that was dark and muddy, the other side was blue, and you could actually see the difference of the channels while you're going down the river. And it took several miles before the Ole Muddy took over the Ohio blue, and it turned all Ole Muddy. So it was pretty interesting. But we were excited to hit the Mississippi finally after all that we'd gone through.
Well, if you can see the different color of the water, but this is kind of a greenish blue, and then that is kind of a muddy, old muddy called the Mississippi River. We have just made it to the Mississippi. There's Dad. We are on the Mississippi River.
I think one of the shocking things for both of us was just how empty the Mississippi River was as far as boats. You'd see a barge once in a while, but regular boats we didn't see. And you almost never saw a house. My assumption is because they got tired of getting flooded out, they just moved because there was no place to stop to get food, no place to stop to get gas unless you were willing to walk 5 miles. But there was just nothing on the Mississippi for a long time.
What really surprised me after we entered the Mississippi is the width of it. It looked like at least a mile wide. And I was thinking when we come to curves and things, I was thinking we could kind of cut across them and save time. But we found out that the Corps of Engineers had put dikes out to keep the flow of the water in the center of the channel for the barges. And we couldn't go along the edges and the shores and cut through bends because we'd be on a rocky dike. So, and another thing is so wide we had to stay in the main current, and I didn't get to see any wildlife. It was so far away, and that was kind of disappointing, having to stay in the mainstream in the center of the Mississippi, and it being so wide.
Yeah, there was areas, if it was foggy, you couldn't see from one side to the other.
And another thing, in the evening, we'd try to find a river or a stream coming in where we get in where it's calm. It's so far away you couldn't even see what was on the shore. I'm sure we passed some good places to camp because we just didn't know the river and didn't know where they was at.
At that time, all we had was a map that I had taken pictures off of Google, and I don't know, probably close to 400 pictures, and I gave it to Dad, and he actually put a book together of each step from one to the other. So we were going off of a hard map of the river system, as we did, and then the Google GPS, we were using that when we could, but when you got down too far, there was areas you could not get a signal of any kind.
And there's a lot of times we had no idea how fast we was going or where we was even at. We was lost a lot of times, and especially when we was going in some of these horseshoe bends and things, we'd be going north and the river was running north instead of south, because it'd go through a horseshoe bend and then swing around and start south again. And there's one evening that we was in one of these long horseshoe bends, and the sun had went down, and we really didn't know that the river was flowing north at that time. And the next morning when we started out, we saw the sun coming up, and we knew to go south we need the sun on our left. Well, we go for quite a ways, and we come to a buoy and found out the water was going the wrong direction, but it wasn't the water, it was us.
So yeah, once we got down the Mississippi a little ways, we had eaten all of our food. I brought as much as I could that we could stay cool. So I think the last, we ran out of our spaghetti and meatballs that I had frozen, and decided we better start catching some fish. So from that point on, we were eating the fish that we caught. And if we didn't catch any fish, we did have some backup with some dehydrated food, but most of it was fish and fish.
Dad's got a fish on. Fish pulled the pole in the water, so it's probably at least a couple pounds. Don't expect to catch too much in this creek, but he's got something. Good way to start the morning. There it is. We're not sure what kind of fish that is. It almost looks like a somewhat of a perch, or looks like good bait for catfish. You got the coffee pot going, boots hanging. Gotta finish the boat. We're ready to roll down the Mississippi.
My grandfather we determined whether we were going to keep a fish or not. My grandfather used to say, if it's big enough for a biscuit, it's big enough to eat. But we didn't catch any small. Most of the fish we caught were, 2, 3, 4 pound catfish was what we were mostly eating.
Nighttime, before we quit for the night, we would throw out some throw lines. I don't know, a lot of people may not know what a throw line is, but we'd have a piece of staging probably 30 foot long or so, and we'd put smaller lines on them and bait the hooks up, and then we'd have a weight on the end of the line and stake it to the bank, and we'd throw the weight out in the water, and then the next morning we'd check it for fish, and usually we had 2 or 3 fish for the next day in case we couldn't catch any. But we fished at night with the throw lines.
As far as sleeping, what we did was we tried to find a little creek or a river to get in behind, so we didn't get beat with the waves from the barges. And one night we pulled into a place where it was very secluded, very calm, and pulled the pontoon up to where it just hit the ground, and set our tents up, went to sleep. And the next morning, hear Dad say, "We got problems." And I felt kind of funny. I thought, why do I feel so funny? And I looked down, and my feet looked like they were 3 feet below where my head was. And what had happened is that the water had dropped so far that night that our pontoon was almost completely on dry land with just the back end in the water. And our John boat, which had gas in it, it was almost completely on the sand. So we thought we could just push it off, and after about 3 or 4 pushes, we realized that wasn't going to happen.
We used our plank board as a pry, and then we found a long piece of driftwood, and we both had something to pry with, and we was thinking we could slide it off because it's pretty thick mud. It wasn't just hard ground, and but we couldn't budge it, so we started digging.
Well, we already pulled the John boat out. Now we have to work on the pontoon. This is what happens when the water drops 3 or 4 feet. Dad's digging that side, I've got the other side. I don't remember Mark Twain writing about having to dig out your vessel to start in the morning.
We actually dug for a while, tried again, that didn't work. And Dad says, well, we need to unload it because it's too heavy. So after we had already loaded everything on, we unloaded it again, tried to pry, still wouldn't move. And I had brought a army shovel, a folding army shovel. So I crawled underneath the pontoon and started digging each pontoon out. Now after Dad goes, that ought to be good enough. So I go back and we pry some more and we still didn't move.
It seemed like we should have been able to move it, but it wouldn't budge. And so we kept digging, and Barry would throw some dirt and mud and stuff out, and I'd grab it and throw it a little further, and well, it looked like we was digging a canal. And it ended up, that's what it looked like after we got off of it. It looked like we had dug a canal.
It took about 6 hours, I think, for us to, of constant digging, to get that silly pontoon off the bank so we could move again. And by the time we got done digging, I was so wore out, I said, Dad, we need to stay another night, because what Dad came up with an idea on, because we didn't know if the water was going to drop further or not.
What we decided we'd better do is we either found a big piece of driftwood or drove a stake, and we tied up, and then we took the pontoon boat out into the water and anchored out away from it and stayed the night away from the bank. And then the next morning we'd go back in and get our stuff that we'd unloaded. But we didn't pull up on the bank anymore.
So we had, the John boat was easy to get off, and we had approximately 150 gallons of gas on the John boat because it was so far between marinas of getting gas. And then we had approximately 50 gallons on the pontoon itself. But there was a time we had to stay as close as we could to the buoys, and Dad was spotting them because, again, we didn't have the a GPS or a depth finder that we got later on, but we'd have to stay close to the buoys because that's where the main line was, or the main stream, and it was deep enough we weren't going to get hung up on sandbars. Dad thinks I hit a buoy, but I saw a log go down and come up right in front of the John boat and flip it, and I probably did hit the buoy at the same time. But anyway, something didn't seem right. It was dragging or something. I look behind us and all I see is the bottom of our John boat. And Dad had come up with an idea of tying all the gas cans together so in case something like that did happen, that we wouldn't lose those.
That is not the way you want your John boat looking. Evidently it hit that log that we didn't even see and turned it over, and so we're trying to get to shore before it sinks to get all the stuff out and turn it back over. Grief.
We had the John boat covered with a tarp because keep the rain out in case it rained, or the wakes that the tugboats made and things. And so when it flipped over, the canvas kept the cans, the gas cans, from sinking or floating away. So we was able to maneuver the pontoon boat over to a rocky shore, and it was rocky.
It was.
And anyhow, we find a big boulder to tie to, and Barry gets in, and finally we unload, or Barry unloads. I'm sitting there watching him, and he unloads off the cans, and then gets the pontoon boat turned back upright, and we put the cans back in it, and we didn't realize at that time that some of it had got some water in with the gasoline, and that gave us some trouble later. But we finally got the John boat back where it was supposed to be, and the canvas back on, and we took off again.